Okay, so let's go and get started. So my name is Yana Vasquez Ballesteros. I'm the Legislature Director for the Department of Toxic Substance Control. Definitely thank you for attending this webinar with us. And also, hopefully, everybody has been able to actually review the workload analysis. And just to give you a quick agenda for the briefing is we're going to go through a quick PowerPoint, and then at the end, we're going to allow about 20 to 25 minutes for questions and answers. You're able to ask your questions either through the chat, and then we'll save the questions for the segment at the end, or wait until we're done with the PowerPoint. And that's going to be really the setup or the format for today's briefing. With that, I can also share the link for the individuals that haven't seen the workload analysis, so they can actually be able to see it. But hopefully y'all received it through the email I sent out on last Friday. With that said, if you are able to rename your name and just your quick affiliation, so we can just get a sense of who is in this virtual setting, that'll be really helpful. And with that, I'll go ahead and really hand it off to Dr. Meredith Williams, who is going to be providing us a quick welcome introduction. So, Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Deanna, and thank you everybody for joining us today. This is a meeting I know that a lot of you have been waiting a long time for, to be able to begin a discussion about the department, what's happening with the resources, what we're working on, what we're not able to work on. And so this is a very welcome opportunity to talk to all of you, and I'm really pleased to see so many people join us today. So with that, could I get the next slide, please? Quick agenda. We're going to go through the reform approach at a very high level, just the overall approach for DTSC. And then we'll give an overview of some of the key findings of the workload analysis, and our Chief Deputy Director, Francesca Negri, will walk through that portion of the discussion, and then we'll open it up for conversation. So next slide, please. I think the turnout today is indicative of why it matters. I think everybody gets that. And DTSC's work is critically important. It's especially important to all those communities with high Cal EnviroScreen EJ scores around the state. It's important for a lot of reasons. But I would say that given that today is Inauguration Day and we've just come out of a pretty dark period in terms of environmental protection, it reminds me that, you only have a certain amount of time to try to get things done. And there is an urgency to getting this work done for DTSC and really digging in. We had hoped to make a lot more progress last year in terms of the DTSC reform effort. COVID had a say about why that didn't happen the way we envisioned it. So we're trying to pick up where we left off and even start from a better, stronger starting point. And one of the reasons we think we're in a stronger position is because we have some data that people can use to really understand how the department is working. So you're all familiar with our challenges. We estimate that, there are more than 90 authorities that have been added to DTSC's responsibilities since the last time the fees were reset. And it is a static fee structure by and large, and we need something more dynamic. And again, the workload analysis will support that discussion. Next slide, please. I'm not even going to spend much time on this slide, which is just, what's the impact of not having adequate funds for the department? It means we can't clean up all the sites we need to clean up around the state. It means we can't enforce as strongly as we'd like to enforce. We have to be selective in terms of enforcement initiatives that we take, which ultimately results in how well we hold polluters accountable. And then, of course, we can't break the cycle by fully implementing our Safer Consumer Products program and getting toxic chemicals out of commerce to the extent that we think we should be. Next slide, please. So the administration's reform procedure proposal is really structured to answer three questions, which is, what programs should DTSC be taking on? And then the question is, well, how much would it cost to actually support those programs once they've been prioritized? And is there a way to fund those programs while disincentivizing the generation and use of hazardous substances? And then lastly, what's an appropriate governance structure to foster accountability and transparency for the department and to have stronger community engagement in the work that we do? The workload analysis is really the tool to support that first question, which is what programs should DTS see delivered? Next slide, please. It is, as I say, it's a tool. It's a tool for a conversation. It really is the information that's needed to say, this is where the money's going. This is what we can do with it. I really think it tells some interesting stories about when the department is funded adequately, how successful it can be. And so hopefully that came through as you read the executive summary, or when you do get around to reading the executive summary. And it just gives people a window into what we're doing. It's not a perfect document. We know it's not a perfect document. It is a snapshot. You have to pick some period of time on which to base a workload analysis. We chose the 18-19 fiscal year, but it really, we think, is adequate to support these discussions. But it's not a budget document. It's not a budget change proposal. It's not, calculated down to the last decimal place in terms of the resources that are needed. And the other thing is, we did not analyze every authority the department has and say whether or not we have the resources to do it. We took some key examples that we think are important, in terms of us being able to do the level of environmental protection that we want, or we know that stakeholders think are important areas for us to be able to address. So next slide, please. So Francesca is going to walk you through, again, the core programs. This workload analysis only covers our 3 core programs. We are working to get that next level of detail with regard to our support programs, and we'll share that with you as soon as it's available. But as I said, we made some decisions about which gaps and which authorities to really characterize and evaluate in terms of the resources, and but it's not everything. So with that, I'll let Francesca walk you through the details of the core program workload analyses.
Thanks, Meredith, and thank you so much, everybody, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here today. I'll try and keep it pretty high level and brief, particularly since some of you have been able to take a look at the analysis itself. But Meredith indicated that we looked at 3 of our core programs. There's actually 4 separate core programs under the Hazardous Waste Management Program that we analyzed, as well as Safer Consumer Products and our Site Mitigation Program. In this analysis, in this phase of the analysis, we actually included our Office of Environmental Information Management because of the critical nature that our IT, our technology program plays in the delivery of our overall mission. It's included in this phase of the workload analyses. So what did we do? Well, we took a look at data that we have from our timekeeping systems. We looked at our current staffing levels, our available employee hours, our program deliverables, such as the number of permits issued or facilities investigated or sites cleaned up. And we looked at it in the context of what improvement initiatives have been implemented in these programs to maximize our use of those resources. And at the end of that analysis, we identified, and this was all looking at the statutory authorities under which we operate, and we identified some key areas in these programs that we do not have the resources to deliver at this time. So overall high level, what we found in this analysis is that the majority of time that staff is spending in these programs is spent on technical duties, from 63 to 75%. And the remaining time is spent on administrative functions such as mandatory training or technical training that staff need to stay current on their skills or improvement projects that tie into DTSC's strategic plan. As Meredith indicated, we did not review all of our statutory authorities and all of the activities we could be performing, but we chose the most significant ones based on the administration and our priorities, as well as feedback that we've been receiving from you over the years. So next slide, please. We'll get started with the permitting division. It's one of our 4 programs under hazardous waste management. It's responsible for overseeing approximately 100 facilities located throughout the state that treat, store, or dispose of California's hazardous waste. We've invested quite a bit of time with your support into this particular program, and it's paid off. The program's implemented multiple process improvements that have reduced the amount of time it takes to issue a permit, as well as strengthen the permit itself so that it is more enforceable. The average time it takes today to issue a permit is 2.5 years, whereas in 2013 it was 4.5 years. Again, we didn't identify many gaps in this program, but the first area that we did identify was in the implementation of our violation scoring procedure. Under this process, each facility receives an annual inspection score, along with a facility score that aggregates 10 years worth of inspection scores. And the permitting division uses these scores to make permit decisions or to require modifications to existing permits that decrease the likelihood of releases or contamination. So the second area that we identified as needing some resources in this program is in our CEQA document review. Additional resources are necessary so that we can use our expertise to provide input into CEQA documents that are submitted by other state agencies or other government entities, which is crucial to mitigating potential environmental harm. Next slide, please. So our Enforcement and Emergency Response Division, also known as EERD, is responsible for overseeing inspections and enforcement of over 100,000 hazardous waste generators and facilities. And these inspections provide local communities with confidence that the facilities in their areas are complying with hazardous waste control laws. It's also responsible for providing hazardous waste cleanup, emergency response for hazardous waste cleanup, and has been integral to accelerating cleanup in response to the devastating wildfires California has been experiencing. EERD has received some limited resources in the recent past. With these resources, we've been able to increase inspections for transporters and metal recyclers, particularly in vulnerable communities. Since 2015-16, DTSC has increased its annual inspection of transporters from an average of 50 per year to 144 per year, and is now inspecting an average of 14 metal recycling facilities each year. And just to provide you with some context for those numbers, there are approximately 900 registered transporters in the state of California and over 2,000 metal recyclers. EERD has implemented its own business process improvements. Examples include reducing the time period to assess and approve administrative penalties by over 60% and to issue inspection reports by over 50%. So the workload analyses for EERD identified gaps in 3 important areas. The first being we need to increase our transporter inspections or decrease the time between those inspections from once every 5 years to once every 3 years. And the reason why we need to do this is we've found that when transporters are not consistently inspected, there are a high rate of violations. Additionally, the program is under-resourced to provide adequate technical guidance and support to the California Unified Program Agencies, or CUPAs. CUPAs are local agencies that are certified by the Secretary of Cal EPA to implement the Cal EPA Unified Program elements in the CUPA's jurisdiction. And these resources are crucial to ensuring that they have the technical guidance and support on hazardous waste inspections and enforcement in their areas. And finally, the third area of resource need we identified was in the implementation of SB 673 related to violation scoring procedure. EERD has a significant role in the implementation of this program. They are responsible for developing the processes and procedures for tracking violations, creating an administrative record for each facility, which includes the documentation necessary to develop the scores, 10 years worth of violations for each permitted facility. And the resources are crucial for this pioneering legislation to achieve its full goal of ensuring that permitted facilities comply with hazardous waste control laws and that the process for determining their compliance is transparent to the public. This will reduce violations and increase our ability to protect human health and the environment. It also helps facilities to comply with the law. Next slide, please. Third program under the Hazardous Waste Management Program is our Office of Criminal Investigations. And this program is the only one under Cal EPA with sworn peace officers to pursue businesses and individuals who criminally violate hazardous waste control laws. They're specially trained to investigate the most egregious violations that pose a significant threat to the public. OCI conducts statewide investigations jointly with local, state, and federal agencies. And the multi-agency approach focuses on environmental justice communities throughout California to stop polluters from releasing toxic waste into the environment. They're pivotal to Cal EPA's ability to effectively pursue criminal activity. One example of the benefit of this program is when they were recently provided limited resources to pursue distributors and sellers of children's metal-containing jewelry. When they inspected 28 jewelry stores in 2017, 21 of them had violations. So the workload analysis identified a need for additional positions to increase our inspections from 50 to 100 additional inspections each year to address crucial areas, including illegal cannabis grows in California. These typically include or involve illegal pesticides that are illegally disposed of and are extremely hazardous. We also can focus on the increase in the number of inspections that DTSC conducts as a result of complaints that are submitted to DTSC from other state, local, and federal agencies, so that we can determine whether or not there is criminal activity associated with those complaints. And then finally, to increase the number of inspections DTSC conducts on distributors and sellers of metal-containing jewelry. Next slide, please. The fourth program under our Hazardous Waste Management Program is our Policy and Program Support Branch. They're responsible for developing and interpreting hazardous waste management statutes and regulations for managing the federal RCRA grant and maintaining DTSC's status as a RCRA authorized state. This work provides the regulatory and policy framework to ensure hazardous waste are managed legally and safely in California. In 1819, this program responded to more than 6,000 regulatory questions, provided 700 responses to partner agencies and the public, and conducted 75 evaluations of site-specific applications for certification. The analysis identified some key areas that this program is under-resourced, primarily in its RCRA authorization program, which is necessary to maintain our delegated authority for enforcing RCRA hazardous waste requirements in California. And this is really important to ensure there's one set of standards for managing RCRA waste in California, rather than a separate federal and a state standard for each site-specific situation. And then another area that we've heard from all of you on is to renew the pollution prevention program that helps businesses implement pollution prevention principles that would result in less generation of solid and hazardous waste, use fewer toxic chemicals, conserve water and energy, and reduce air pollution. Ultimately, these strategies will lessen the burden of cleaning up contaminated sites across California in its future. So moving on to our Safer Consumer Products program. This program is charged with accelerating the quest for the use of safer chemicals in consumer products. And to do this, the program requires manufacturers of products that contain chemicals determined to pose risks to human health and the environment to search for safer materials. And since the program was implemented in 2014, SAFER's resources have supported building a new innovative program that's comprised of multidisciplinary teams of scientists and engineers who employ a science-based approach to leveraging multi-million-dollar markets and manufacturers' interests. Along with multiple new products in the queue, they have successfully regulated the first 3 priority products, and they're putting them through the alternative analyses process. An example of this program's early success is when they took on the children's foam padded sleeping products, which are also known as nap mats. And they were able, through their efforts, to initiate a change in a $325 million industry, preventing the exposure of potentially millions of infants and toddlers to carcinogenic chemicals. Having said that, the program is under-resourced to fully implement on its statutory mandates and to make a meaningful impact on the large universe of consumer products under its authority. So without the augmentation of resources, Safer Consumer Products will be forced to shift the resources that they have currently dedicated to the front end of their business process, where they identify chemicals of concern for DTSC's focus, and work will be delayed. And so in other words, the capacity for new products will be greatly reduced by as much as 80%, and the program's ability to process more impactful and complex consumer products will be further limited. So moving on, next slide, to our site mitigation and restoration program. This program its purpose is basically to investigate contaminated sites, and when contamination is found, to oversee the removal of hazardous waste so that sites can be restored to useful purpose. And they also oversee voluntary cleanups conducted by developers who are remediating sites for redevelopment. And they manage grant funds and provide cost recovery support to our financial planning office. As you've probably heard, there are approximately 200,000 contaminated sites in California, and we are responsible as a society to clean up these sites, especially those at which there are no responsible parties. Recently, the program has only had enough resources to conduct cleanups at sites where the contamination is already known and its impact is already characterized. And what that means is it doesn't have a sufficient amount of resources to investigate sites where there's suspected contamination based on prior industry use. Nearly a third of people in California live near a site that a cleanup site that DTSC oversees, and 46% of those sites are in environmental justice communities. The program's work revitalizes communities by working with the developers to ensure properties are safe to build on. Currently, DTSC oversees 1,800 sites, or about 1% of the 200,000 sites, undiscovered contamination sites in California. Additionally, 15,000 known contaminated sites need assessment and potential cleanup, including 8,600 dry cleaner sites whose chemical legacy can threaten groundwater and people in nearby structures. The cleanup program has no site discovery program, as I indicated. This means no actions being addressed to address those estimated total number of sites. And by increasing our service levels, DTSC could investigate sites and determine the extent and type of contamination, and then take the subsequent steps to remediate that contamination. This will restore sites more often than not located in vulnerable communities for useful purpose, and stimulate the economy while reducing exposure to harmful chemicals. I have to be clear that what we have here up on this slide are 3 different scenarios that demonstrate different service levels that are affiliated with the resources identified. And these resources are just for the initial work of site discovery and investigation. We estimate that the cost for each of these scenarios would raise by approximately 50% in year 4 as investigation becomes more in-depth and cleanups move into actual construction or implementation phase of remediation strategies. So moving on, the last program I'm going to share with you today is our Office of Environmental Information Management, or our technology program. They're responsible for delivering technologies, resources and services, leveraging common solutions, and providing a safe, secure infrastructure through which the department provides its businesses and administrative programs. They are significantly under-resourced. We've actually conducted 2 workload analyses on this program in the past 5 years. And in particular, there's a resource gap in the ability to adequately respond to cybersecurity threats, which are becoming increasingly common in public sector. Modernization of a data management and governance infrastructure is crucial to supporting our programs and to reducing cybersecurity threats, but also to providing data and information that you as stakeholders need in order to, help and support the work that you do to reduce environmental contamination and threats of exposure. Our most recent analysis indicates that we're deficient about 18.5 positions for the current workload, and we need approximately $20 million to update legacy systems. An increase in service levels would necessitate an increase in OEIM resources, meaning that that's just the amount of resources we calculate are necessary for the current service level in the department. Any of these estimates with OEIM are subject to confirmation by our oversight agencies. And just one area where we've had some successes, we've been updating our cost recovery management system, which is on schedule for a 2021 implementation, what that demonstrates is that when we are given resources for information technology projects, we're managing them within project scope and budget and successfully. So this program has also dedicated a lot of its time and attention to improving its business processes over the past couple of years. So with that, I'll hand the mic back over to Meredith to conclude the presentation, and then we'll take some questions. Thank you.
So before we move into questions, I just want to give a little snapshot of where this fits into the governor's budget. The governor's budget includes a number of different elements related to DTSC reform. The fee structure, of course, is a very important aspect of the proposal. It is a fee structure that simplifies our fees. We're proposing to get rid of some of the fees, roll them into one fee, and then also change the structure so that people pay more if they generate more waste using a per ton model. We believe this could lead to a stable funding model, and one reason it's also stable is because there would be a board in place that would have the authority to increase fees, to continue to make sure that the department has the resources it needs as priorities change and as conditions evolve. The board would provide the transparency and accountability that we hope for. We did, during the conversations last year, we learned a lot about what stakeholders really think is necessary to have true accountability for the department. And so we've learned a lot from that, and we'll continue to strengthen the accountability aspects of the proposal. And then, of course, because of the incredible capital gains benefit for the state, DTSC has an opportunity. It's a pretty rare opportunity to get a one-time infusion of $300 million in funding, and to use those funds to really help the agenda for the administration to revitalize the economy with equity in mind, to help address some longstanding problems like housing, to really do those kinds of things in sustainable ways. And so there will be funds available for us to take on more orphan site cleanup, and also to develop a brownfields grant program to work with local agencies to get some of that investigation done, to give, to provide the certainty and the understanding of what people have to deal with if they want to put those lands into productive use. We intend to replicate the successful program we have associated with the Exide cleanup, the work program, where we've trained nearly 100 people, maybe a little less than that, but to work on cleanup sites so that they understand what it takes to do cleanup work, and then they've gotten gainful employment working on the crews that are cleaning up the residential properties around Exide. We feel that this is a successful model that should be replicated throughout the state in a number of different locations using local partners. We did not implement that program on our own. We definitely relied on local partners, LA Trade Tech. So those are the three elements of the one-time $300 million funds. And then the administration is planning to include enough funding to finish the cleanup of the 3,200 sites that were originally planned for the Exide cleanup, the residential cleanup. So those are the different parts of the budget. Of course, we hope that today we can spend the bulk of the time talking about the workload analysis, but I understand this is very much on people's minds in terms of how does this fit in with everything else that's going on in the budget. Next slide, please. So just talked a bit about the governor's budget. Francesca shared some of the key findings about what we've been able to do and the culture we're trying to build here in the department, which is a culture of continuous improvement and using our resources wisely. Hopefully this is information that you find valuable for level of service discussions, and will facilitate making decisions about whether or not this department should be given additional resources to do the important work that we're charged with. So with that, I think we should move on as quickly as possible to those thoughtful ongoing discussions. We will be doing in-depth briefings for legislators and for you and other stakeholders on the core program so that you can dig down and to another level of detail for each of the 6 programs so that you can understand a little more of what's behind those numbers. So please stay alert for those invitations and those meeting announcements. Deanna, I think we're ready to open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Meredith. So with that, like I mentioned, we can actually go ahead and start the queue. If you have a question, definitely raise your hand feature. And then if you want to go ahead and write a question on the chat, feel free, and then we'll go ahead and track in that way. So I'll open it up to the group. Jane, go ahead.
So I hope we do not actually go forward with the work program as a symbol of something here, because many of those workers decided that they would rather stay home and get $600 a week in unemployment during the pandemic because they were not paid prevailing wage. So that's like a serious problem. With the state contracting, you're supposed to be paying prevailing wage. And that was something that, the folks in the community were pretty unhappy about. So, and also when I look at your $31.4 million to clean up 3,200 homes at Exide, that's only $9,000, $9,812 a home. And from what I understand right now, the department is actually spending about $68,000 a home, which would be $217 million. So,
Okay.
I don't understand why we would give the department more money when we can't crunch numbers correctly here, right? The question that I want to ask is a very fundamental question. The department has roughly 80 permits for RCRA facilities. How many of those permits have expired? And what's it going to take to get those permits that have been expired correctly permitted with updated permits, including money set aside for corrective action and the financial assurance plans? Because that's one of the greatest liabilities that the state has right now. So like, I didn't see that in this workflow analysis. That'd be great if you could respond to that.
Okay, we'll tackle all of your questions. I'm going to first ask Anna to speak a little bit about the work program and the project labor agreement, if you wouldn't mind, Anna, and prevailing wage.
Sure, and Jane, maybe I can follow up with you afterwards as well. For environmental workers on the project, because we put in place a project labor agreement, folks who are doing that environmental remediation work are required to be paid prevailing wage. So I definitely, would love to learn more about the folks you've been talking to and make sure that things are moving as they should be. But it's actually a pretty core piece of the project labor agreement and the training program. There's, I think, a lot of lessons learned too. From our partnership with LA Trade Tech. And so we want to build on that and see what works in different communities with that one-time funding that Meredith just mentioned.
Yeah. With respect to the 3,200 properties, I was not precise in my language, and I'll be very clear about that. What we were originally given a certain amount of funds to clean up the 2,500 properties. And then when Governor Newsom came in, he gave us enough funding to what we hoped would allow us to clean up an additional 700 properties, which brings the total to 3,200. However, there's still a gap to getting to the 3,200. So I do not by any means want to imply that we're going to clean up 3,200 properties for $31 million. That's just the gap between what we are able to do with the funding we've been given to date and what we need to fully clean up the 3,200 properties. So that just want to clarify that point. And then lastly, with respect to permits, I think, Francesca, you quoted some of the numbers in terms of our pace of permit decisions. We can go back 4 or 5 years, and the department made 0 and 1 permit decision in a couple consecutive years. And we're looking at north of a dozen for this fiscal year. I wish I knew exactly how many permit decisions had already been made. We do have, and we will continue to have, some permits that expired, or as we say, are continued permits for a number of years yet. It's a challenge for us. We are working through it. And we do have a pretty solid plan that we're executing on to make sure that those continued permits are cleared out of the queue in the next couple of years. And in fact, we had a plan for that, and we are ahead of schedule. And I will say, we are going to be publishing a dashboard on our website, and that dashboard will give our stakeholders a better chance to see where permits are in queue and have a better handle on whether or not we're making progress.
Well, I mean, the last time I looked, almost a third of the permits are expired. So some have been expired for over a decade. So
yes, they are.
That would seem to be like a bit of a fire. That would seem to be a bit of a fire for me, Meredith. That's what happened with Exide. We have facilities operating without updated permits. Like, what's our plan on that? To me, I was hoping that this presentation would give me that, and I don't see that.
Well, that wasn't the intent of this presentation, and we are always happy to give you an update on our permit work. And in fact, what I would say is, as I said, we're going to have core program briefings, and we can come, when we do those core program briefings, we will be very well prepared to speak to that backlog, to speak to the expired continued permits, and to talk about what we're doing to address them. And the financial assurance piece of it, because you did point to that, and it is a critical part of managing these permits properly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Jane. And with that, I have Ingrid. Thank you.
Thanks. And I have so many questions, so I'm not going to ask them all here. I'm hoping maybe we can have some follow-up conversations. I guess my initial question is about how these numbers came about. I do see this was an executive summary, so I am wondering if there is another document or other resources that show how the figures came about. A threshold question that came to my mind is I didn't see a lot of standards guiding these estimates for needed positions. So of course, more positions would be more enforcement. But how did DTSC come up with those particular figures as the right figures? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of something that I'm really curious about. I have thoughts on every single item you went through in terms of, this seems like it would make a big difference in terms of protecting health versus, this seems like more, process and, ultimately not. And so that I'm going to hold off and maybe go over it another time. But big picture thinking, this proposal and workload analysis seems to really move towards or keeps the status quo approach to how DTSC operates. And I am particularly interested, as we've seen, different failures throughout the year, of taking a step back and really changing the entire approach. And that includes some bigger picture things like the statewide hazardous waste management plan. Make sure that we are putting facilities in the places where they need to be, and the right types of facilities and where they ought to be. The pollution prevention program coupled with the fee structures, coupled with the hazardous waste management plan, which hopefully has a hazardous waste goal. These big picture things might need to be done before we can ascertain, these are the different positions we need and where. And so I'm a little concerned with moving forward with just the exact same structure and popping more people into these places, which frankly, haven't worked for our communities. And, and I do wonder about how much of the failures of DTSC come from inadequate staff versus, a culture of inefficiency. And I will just remark that the fact that this workload analysis took so long to come out is indicative of what we usually see from DTSC. And I don't know that the workload analysis stemmed from inadequate staff, or if there is this culture of timidity, like a fear to act, and a lack of boldness. And putting more people into DTSC, if we don't have that bold leadership, isn't going to make a lot of difference. And so to me, there was a bit of a chicken and the egg, and are we really focused on the right problem? And then the last thing I'll just say is about the cleanups. Those numbers are astronomical, and the amount of money to even make a dent in those number of sites really needs to be thoughtful. We need to figure out not how we're going to use the 300 million, but really what is the approach the state's going to take. And I think an initial step is to come up with an estimate. If we need to look at the 200,000 site estimate, and I know that came from 2007, 2008, we need to replicate that study to see if we still think that's the right number. And then we need to look at what we know about cleanups and costs to come up with a ballpark figure. And we're going to need a different way of funding that. So again, just popping in some more people for cleanups or popping in like an infusion for 1 year is not going to solve the big picture. And that's really, I think this is the point in time where we ought to be looking at the big picture. So I'll start.
Okay, I'm not surprised that you had a lot of input on these different topics. I'm not going to be able to talk to all of them. And I think Francesca can speak to some of the issues. I will, in fact, workload analyses they're tough to do. And normally when a department undertakes a workload analysis, they are given an awful lot of funds to do so, to hire a Deloitte or somebody like that to do the workload analysis. We were not given those funds, yet we knew that this was critical for our stakeholders to do, to have this information. So we took it on, and yeah, we did it with belt and suspenders. We strapped the effort together. That said, we feel that the numbers hold up, and you will see a lot more detail in the coming weeks behind how we came up with it, how we used our time tracking system to come up with the numbers and provide baselines for how many resources it takes to do any part of the work that we do. So I do want to say that, it took a long time, and I'm really proud of the work and of the fact that the department managed to do it in the face of not being given the resources we needed to do it. So I will say that. And then with respect to this conversation, we've been having this conversation for a while, and it's important. I appreciate you keeping it on the front burner of what's the link between a comprehensive hazardous waste management plan and the fee structure and pollution prevention. And those three things have to work together. The workload analysis is the workload analysis. It is part of a larger conversation that has to think through all of those things together. And so the workload analysis is not going to cover all of those issues to the extent that you want. And we will be able to talk about those things in forums throughout the budget season and beyond, because it is important to think about things holistically. So, and then let's see, in terms of boldness, again, resources you're right, they're only one piece of the puzzle. And in the wake of the Exide bankruptcy, the department has done a lot of reflecting about, where should we be working to strengthen how we take action. What have we learned? Where can we be bolder? Where can we take more aggressive steps? And really, just being very, very firm about that. I would say we have I'm really pleased with my leadership team. We're taking new legal approaches because we have a new general counsel. We have, just a really dynamic, creative leadership team that's going to keep pushing me and pushing all of us. And then we have a secretary who's going to keep pushing the department to make more aggressive decisions when they're warranted. So I think the criticism is what is taken. We receive it, and until you see evidence of those decisions, I expect to keep hearing that. So the proof is in the pudding.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And there was another question, Ingrid, that you had regarding the data. How was the data compiled? That's something that, go ahead, Meredith.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Again, there'll be supporting documentation.
Yeah.
But Francesca may want to add.
Yeah. So Ingrid, we have, you probably heard us refer to it, a timekeeping system. We have codes for different activities that tie to projects and programs. And so employees record their time on a daily basis, and it ties to the projects or activities that they're working on. And we aggregated that and analyzed it to take a look at, how much time were they spending doing technical work versus other type of work, and is that an appropriate amount of time? And then we looked at it in the context of, okay, what improvement initiatives are we trying to put in place to maximize the use of those resources so that they're operating, to your point, more efficiently and effectively. And so sometimes that means kind of front loading your resources into that improvement project. And so in some of the areas, what you're going to see is less time doing technical work because they're front loading the efficiency process that's going to ultimately result in higher outputs per position. So we looked at it from that perspective, and we have really good data because we have a timekeeping system where we actually record and track this type of information. So that's how we looked at it. by program, and it did take some time. I mean, you know, we had to make sure the data was good, and we combed through it several different times and then put it together. And so each of the programs has a separate slide deck that goes through the total number of hours available to deliver their program, what their statutory authorities are, the classification structure that we're using to deliver those programs. And so all of that's contained in individual core program slide decks, which are very dense, have a lot of information and data in them. And we took information from those slide decks and created the executive summary.
Yeah, and with that, and this is where the briefings, additional briefings are going to come in handy, because again, we were thinking of sharing the slide decks with you because they're so dense. I don't think that was going to do justice to this group, because again, there's a lot of explanation that needs to happen, and we prefer to actually have the briefing and have the explanation, and then we can share the slide decks, because then it will make a little bit more sense. Within that, there's going to be a presentation along with where there's going to be a Q&A. And we're planning on basically hosting those in the next 2 weeks. An email is going to be sent out. You can register for all the 3 briefings for the core programs, or you can just attend one out of the 3, or, you know, kind of your interest within the core program. So hopefully I will provide a little bit more. It's just, again, what Francesca mentioned, it was more of, can we just provide a quick overview, and then from there really getting into more of the details later on. Okay. Okay, and with that, Jane, do you want to go?
So, you know, one of the single most important lessons from the Exide bankruptcy should be that the department needs to reverse its decision on corrective action financial assurance. Because right now, the department basically starts saving for its kids' college education when they get their acceptance letter. So right now, and I don't know when this decision was made, because it clearly was not made in the light of day, the department does not require financial assurance for corrective action at their RCRA permitted facilities until the facilities are closed. Which now leads us to this very interesting place where the financial assurances for all of the permitted facilities that that this EPA DTSC has are completely uncovered. So it's basically a wealth transfer from the very communities that host the facilities, right, to the facility operators. And so, like, until you're willing to, like, fundamentally change that, right, I don't see how we solve that problem. And I don't see, like, in the governor's budget, I don't see in this presentation, I don't see that thoughtfulness about changing that. And imagine the calls I got from Congress and from the legislature last Friday morning when the department said, when asked, are you seeking federal funding for the hundreds of millions of dollars of liability that Exide walked away from? And the answer was categorically no, which means you're either going to seek funding from the state or you're going to leave the contamination in place. Then further imagine our absolute, like, what is going on when we find out that the Exide facility is actively being marketed to be sold prior to it being cleaned up, and even prior to closure plans being completed. Like, it's on the market right now, essentially has a for sale sign out in front of it. So I don't know, it's really difficult for me to understand and to see that, like, there has been some sort of thoughtful understanding that you must require financial assurances for your RCRA corrective action at your operating facilities. And that needs to be done through the permitting process. And so when you update the permits, you need to force those facilities to put some sort of financial assurances in escrow. And I don't see a plan for that. Do you guys have a plan for that? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, we definitely have thought about that. That's, again, that wasn't in the scope of the workload analysis. You know, at the end of the month, there will be trailer bill language that will come out that will have a level of detail that you just don't get in the initial Jan 10 budget. And that'll provide an opportunity to look at what we're thinking about on some of these issues, and to have additional discussions about what the way forward is. We agree that in reflecting on Exide, there are definitely, I'd say that there's more than one way to strengthen the financial assurance. And we're looking at all of those ways and trying to figure out what the right vehicle is to make those changes when we can. And some of them require statutory changes, and some of them are things we can just go ahead and move on our own. And so we're looking at all of those things and really taking them quite seriously.
Mm-hmm.
We are time limited, and I see a couple.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat, and also we have Angela with her question. With that, we can definitely we can just quickly address the question with Debbie on the chat, which basically mentions you mentioned that the workload analysis is not a budget request. I couldn't add up all the gaps in associated price tags. You also mentioned that the governor's budget does not include a fee structuring. How do these two financial assessments align? So that's the first question.
So let me go ahead and take that. Thanks, Debbie, for the question. The workload analysis, provides different service levels for the site mitigation program, as I indicated. But total, the aggregate number of gap in resources for the service levels that we included in the workload analysis, which is a document that's meant to be transparent about how we're using our resources and what we're not resourced to do, so that there's awareness that can be used for the subsequent conversations that we intend to have about what is the right service level for DTSC to be providing to protect California's health and the environment. And so the number that's in the summary is approximately $189 million, which is a 54% increase over our current budget levels. But that is for those resource gaps that were identified in the workload analyses and that I described in detail in the presentation today. The fee restructure is really more about, and Rick Broush is on and he can correct me, but it's more really about, making sure that there is an equitable fee structure that spreads the cost of managing hazardous waste equitably amongst all polluters, and that that it meets the polluter pays principle. Again, Meredith indicated the TBL is going to have a lot more detail related to the fee structure that's coming out at the end of the month. Finally, what we mean by a support position, Debbie, are those really crucial, important positions in our financial services programs and in our administrative programs and our communications and legislation and legal that are necessary for the core programs to deliver their missions. And we can't, we have to say, our Office of Environmental Equity is absolutely essential to the delivery of any of these core programs. So what we mean by that, the support program is those positions, and they're in phase 2 of our workload analyses. So they don't mean different things for different program areas necessarily, although the number of support positions by program area would differ depending on the activity being performed. So I hope that answered your question, but happy to take it offline and call you directly if you have additional questions.
Okay, well, thank you, Francesca. And then we'll go with Angela, and then I see another question, but and just given that's 4:59, so we'll just have to be mindful of time. Angela?
Hi, everyone. I just had a quick question by way of clarification and just a quick co-signing with Ingrid's comments about really looking forward to getting the details of all this so that it makes, so that we can figure out if it actually makes sense and the ways that it does and doesn't make sense. But so you've outlined, I think, on page 7, a total of 511 positions that are you're calling your gap, right? I'm assuming we're going to see some budget trailer language at some point in time that would tell us about how we're going to put together this basically $189 million in order to fund those 500 positions. But what I'm wondering about is, we know this is a snapshot of some priorities that DTSC has chosen to move forward with. Of course, I'm grateful to see VSP there. And I'm wondering about all the other stuff, all the other gaps, all the other programs, all the other authorities, all the other work that's not captured in this document but presumably are important authorities, important programs, important things that need to occur in order to protect people from hazardous waste. And so I'm just wondering, what's the plan for after you get $189 million? What's the next? What comes next?
Yeah. So I will say that I would not, I want to be clear that it is a prioritization of the analysis of which gaps that we decided to analyze. We are not saying that we are alone in isolation, saying we're going to close all those gaps this year. I mean, we have a reality check of what's happened to this economy. And it's going to be a process to really resource the department appropriately. We have thoughts about which of those gaps are most urgent to close in a short time frame. But honestly, again, as Ingrid pointed out, the gap is huge, and so it's not going to get closed overnight. So first of all, I want to be very clear about that. And you know, if the reform goes through, there will be a board, and a board is a place to have a discussion about some of those other authorities. We'll continue to look at those other authorities, and if through this process of these discussions, we hear from stakeholders, we really want you to characterize the resources needed to close a particular gap, we could go back and look at that particular gap. But given the broad array of gaps we have, it's hard to just say we're going to continue to invest resources in workload analyses when there's just so many different things that we could look at.
Can I just ask, I'm sorry, just a quick follow-up to make sure I understood. So we should not expect to see a budget request that's for $189 million. It's going to be some subset of that. Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And then with that, Andrea also pinged me to remind me. She had a question. So we'll go to Andrea before we can go to the Ingrid's question. So, Andrea? No.
Andrea Ventura, is that?
Yeah.
Is that, okay.
Andrea, you're on mute.
Oh. No, we can't hear you. Do you want to write it in the chat? No.
Oh, there you are. No.
Her mic doesn't work. So, okay.
Oh,
That's so weird. I don't.
starting. Can you chat or not? Oh, okay.
Okay. So we'll definitely be in touch, Andrea. With that, we have the last question is Ingrid, which is, she put in the chat, which is time permitting. I had a question about if we had comparable data from other BDOs on percentages of time spent on program work and the number of support positions for the program areas.
It's a really great question, Ingrid. I'm not aware of any of the other BDOs doing a workload analysis. I have done workload analyses in my career in other state departments, though, and it's not, those numbers can vary depending on how a particular department is resourced and how much work, how much training is required in that department, or in particular technical training. The goal, of course, with increased efficiencies would be to increase the amount of technical time spent for our technical positions. But included in the workload analysis were supervisorial positions who tend to do more administrative work because of the nature of their jobs and what their requirements are versus line staff who are actually working on projects. So I'm happy to get into more detail with you when the slides become available and we walk you through it. But that's a great question, and there isn't a lot of data out there in state government that we can compare it to.
Okay. Given that we are 5 minutes after the hour, so with that, I really want to reemphasize that this is not the last time we're going to be with each other. This is the first of many. Like I mentioned, there's going to be a couple briefings that are going to be scheduled, and then from there, there's going to be additional documentation. If any of y'all still have any questions or want to meet with any of us, please just send me an email. And then I can definitely follow up with an additional meeting. And then with that, I can, hand it off to Dr. Williams, and she can go ahead and close us off. So go ahead.
Thank you, Deanna. And thank you, everybody. Thank you for the questions. They're really helpful for us to know, to make sure that we're prepared for the more detailed discussions. The reform proposal is complicated. And there are a lot of different elements that we have to bring together to successfully do what we need to do to reform the department. And so we appreciate you bringing some of the other elements into the conversation. We'll continue that and look forward to the next discussions. But mostly, thank you for showing up today. It's a great day for a lot of us, and this is a nice way to wrap it up. I think this is a day when it feels good to be a public servant. So with that, I wish you good evening. Thank you.